From Wish TV and the All Indiana Podcast Network, this is the Business, Equity, and Opportunities Podcast with Scott Sander.
Welcome to the Business, Equity, and Opportunities Podcast. I'm Scott Sander. On this episode, pods by and for small business owners. We look at business services for nonprofits and how to resolve workplace conflicts.
Every business is unique and has a target audience. If you own or manage a business, Circulus Digital Media can help you connect and grow your customer base with turnkey digital solutions that are nimble, offering best-in-class results, service, and support to reach a bigger customer base, allowing you to pinpoint a specific audience down to the smallest details. Get outside the city, the state, span the globe. Put Circulus Digital Media to work for you. Get started now at circulusdigital.com. That's circulusdigital.com.
First, getting started. The head of our All Indiana Podcast Network, Alan Haupt, is back with more of his conversation with Dave Jackson about pods by and for small business owners.
This is Business, Equity, and Opportunities. Getting started.
So we're talking today with the principal of the School of Podcasting, award-winning Hall of Fame podcaster, Dave Jackson. Morning, Dave.
Good morning.
Yeah, and so as you are planning the podcast then, so what steps are needed? I mean, we've talked about we need a microphone, we need artwork. As you're planning what you're going to talk about, what sort of steps are we needing to follow there?
Yeah, you need to come up with a name, and this is where sometimes you want to call it, L&J Plumbing. Well, nobody's searching. They might be searching for plumbing, but L&J not so much. So you have to really put yourself in the shoes of your audience and think, what are they searching for, and what kind of person is going to want to listen to this show? Because the more obvious it can be, the better. Sometimes we get a little too cute with the name of our show, and that can actually kind of end up shooting you in the foot a little bit. I had somebody once that was going to name a show After the Darkness. And I said, go ask a bunch of people, what do you think this show is about? And he did. And somebody said, isn't that a band from the 90s? And somebody thought it was about vampires. And I asked him again, what's your show about? And he said, it's about my life after blindness. And so I was like, that's the name of your show. So any kind of, obvious name that has your keywords in it that you're trying to, rank for, things like that. And then the other thing you can kind of think about, especially if it's like a family-owned business, lean into whatever your story is. And every business has a story. And so you can kind of mix those into the podcast if you have a founder or, the CEO. And I realize CEOs are really busy, but if you can somehow squeeze them in for a minute or two of every episode, even if it's just to introduce, hey, today's topic, we're going to talk about blah, blah, blah. And here is, and then if you have somebody else do the podcast. But if you can have them involved, it just gives the podcast legitimacy. I remember, I don't think they're still doing it, but Evernote, the really popular note-taking app, they had their marketing director, they had like their technical person, and then they would come in with the CEO and they would answer questions from their audience. And so what's that doing is it's creating a bond between you and your potential audience or your current customers, depending on, which side of that sale they're on. And I always thought, wow, that's amazing that the CEO is taking time to do that. But it also showed that, wow, this guy really cares about his customers, because he would come in just for that segment to answer that. And then the other thing I always thought was interesting is they had a segment where tell us how you're using our product. And so these people they had a little button where you could click and send voicemail, or you could call on your phone or whatever it was to capture your voice. And these people like, oh, I never thought of this, but I'm using Evernote and then they would tell their story. And it was interesting because as an entrepreneur, you're like, ooh, that's a good idea. I've never thought of using it that way. But it was really a commercial without sounding like, a commercial. So there are a lot of different ways you can work this. The goal is to build brand loyalty, to show that you're reliable by having a consistent schedule. And when you are helpful, it creates that whole know, like, and trust thing that we all talk about when it comes to sales. When you got know, like, and trust and say, oh, by the way, we're launching a new product, you might want to check this out. That's you have, like I say, it's not the end of cold calling, but your leads are much warmer than they used to be.
Sure. And, it goes to the point that maybe somebody who's thinking about starting a podcast for their business might think, well, hey, this is a commercial that I control the reins of. I have the narrative of this commercial. But if you think of it beyond the commercial and more of a building a relationship with your customers or potential customers, that's probably a better way to think of it. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And then if you can get communication going with your audience, I know the company I work for, we were doing a webinar once. We actually would promote webinars on our podcast. So that's another kind of thing you can do with this, is update what's going on, and et cetera, et cetera. And somebody brought up an idea, and we had kind of done half of that idea. And I said, boy, that's a good idea. I never thought of that. So you end up actually getting free kind of consulting from your actual customers, like, oh, I wish it did this. And then you go, oh, you know what? I know it does A, but we've never really thought of doing B. And then you can go through that process and talk to the rest of your newsletter or whatever you're putting out there. Hey, we're thinking of adding this feature. Somebody brought it up in our podcast. What do you think? And now you've got your built-in focus group.
That's a great point. So once you have your podcast, how do you let your customers know that you have that and it's something that they might want to check out?
Yeah, you want to make sure you're in the top directory. So right now that's Apple and Spotify, but I'd also be in like Amazon Music, and there's iHeartRadio and all sorts of other different places. And it takes maybe 10 minutes to get your podcast listed in there. And once you're there, I'm assuming that most businesses hopefully have some sort of email list that they can say, hey, we've been communicating, to you via this newsletter. We're still doing that, but now we have this new way. You can listen to us in the car while you're walking the dog, whatever you're doing. And then we have this new podcast, and then have the links to Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon right there in the email. So no matter that's going to cover a huge chunk of podcast listeners. So they can then click on those links, go right to their favorite app and follow the show. And that way, every time a new episode comes out, it automatically comes down to their phone, or if they're watching online, things like that. And that's the other benefit. If a business is already blogging, you've already got the content. Just read that into a microphone and then throw a player on that same blog post. And what happens is the words attract Google, which is great. So Google, you come up in a search, somebody clicks on it, they go over, they click play on the player, and now Google goes, well, that's interesting. Every time we send somebody over to Alan's website, they're there for like 13 minutes. That must be really good stuff. So it can actually help boost your SEO and web traffic as well.
Again, thank you, Dave. I appreciate your input and talking to us today. Dave Jackson, everybody.
Well, thanks for having me. This has been great.
Time to take a look at accounting and bookkeeping. Sareka DiOrio currently leads the financial management and bookkeeping service areas for Mission Management. She's also CFO of Indiana Youth Services Association and has provided contract CFO services for various nonprofit organizations around the region. We talked to her about whether outsourcing some of your company's accounting needs can be big for you, especially for a nonprofit.
This is Business, Equity, and Opportunities, Accounting and Bookkeeping.
So one of my other roles here is as Executive Director of Mission Management Services. And Mission Management Services is what we call a social venture company. So the purpose of the program is to make money for the home organization, to help offset administrative costs, help develop programs. But Mission Management is really unique in that the model is to provide business services to other not-for-profit organizations. And in that, help them manage their mission as well. Oftentimes, we'll find an executive director working on QuickBooks. Well, that is not an efficient, effective use of their time. So we come in and provide those services to them at a very competitive, actually very reasonable, usually below market rate to help other not-for-profits. And then they are able to focus, that executive director or program director or whoever has been doing that, then is able to focus on driving their own mission forward. People that aren't trained or qualified, not that they can't do the work, not that they're not intelligent enough, but that's not their passion, that's not their training. So then they're spending a lot of extra time getting things done. And they're not necessarily producing reports that help a board see the whole picture. A lot of times when we've come in, we've seen sort of not your standard income statement and balance sheet, but some form of, maybe a check register that they're bringing to the board and saying, okay, this is what we're doing. Well, that doesn't really give you the whole picture of what's happening in the organization. So I find a lot of times reporting can be lacking. Retention of documents, for instance. Nobody knows or probably cares, and why should they, what the retention rules are. We know all that, and we make sure that's done properly. Payroll, tax liabilities. A lot of times people don't understand the importance of making sure those are paid on time and that those are the top of the list. You have payroll and then you have the government, and you need to make sure you prioritize those. Just things like that they don't know those things, and they really shouldn't have to know those things. They should have somebody that does that for them. I find, unfortunately, for-profit businesses, they just tend to pay their people a little bit better than we do in the nonprofit sector. We have a different level here where, you've got people with such heart and such passion, a lot of times doing this work for half of what they could get in the private sector. But I think that really shows their commitment and their passion. And so one of the other things that, we try to do here at IYSA is try to look at the market and see what's out there and make sure that our people are being paid a fair market wage for the jobs that they're doing. Another difference is a lot of times they just have more unrestricted cash, I guess is what you would call it. They are in charge of how their funds are spent. We sometimes in the not-for-profit world are restricted by grants, by donors, on how we can spend our money. So they have a little more leeway and they have more choice in how they spend their funds than we do. I think some donors just have a real passion for certain things. And so they want their funds used for those certain things. And I think that's important to honor. But I think also when we can present the whole picture of what the organization does and say, make the case for letting us choose how those funds are used, then I think that's how we bring donors on board, when they look at our entire organization and not just this piece of it or that piece of it. So if we can tell the story in its entirety, I think we have a much better chance of getting unrestricted funds. I think it's very important that we realize we are spending other people's money to drive this mission. And I think in every possible way, we should be as efficient as we can. And we should be very careful on how we spend our money. I think it's important to remember that we are stewards of other people's funds and driving forward programs that they are invested in, whether it be a government agency, a private foundation, a private donor. They have an investment in what we are doing, and we should really manage that investment to the best of our ability. Our reach is far. It's across the state. It's in many different areas. It's youth, it's families, it's businesses, it's youth workers, it's youth organizations. It's vast, and I think that's really exciting, the amount of work that we do. I have people sometimes say, give me the elevator speech of IYSA, and I said, well, do you have time to go to the 32nd floor? Because there is a lot that we do, and I am so honored to be part of that, and to know that even though I'm not in the direct service and necessarily working with the youth or with the youth agencies for that sort of programming, that the work I do behind the scenes helps all of them move forward and drive their missions forward.
As a boss, conflict resolution will be a critical skill to help ease issues that can prevent a peaceful workplace. Richard Burke works for JAMS Pathways, which offers dispute resolution to companies.
This is Business, Equity, and Opportunities, running your business day to day.
Time to meet a new friend and contributor here on Business, Equity, and Opportunities. Richard Burke is kind enough to talk to us about a kind of a tough topic, but a crucially important one, particularly for somebody who may be the boss in a small business. Richard, thanks for being with us. Conflict resolution's the issue. Kind of get our viewers up to speed as to how you've become an expert in this.
Well, gosh, Scott, I've been resolving conflict as the youngest child in my family pretty much my whole life. But since I graduated law school close to 40 years ago, I've spent 4 years as an assistant district attorney, 25 years as an academic professor teaching conflict resolution and consulting, and now almost 9 years at the company that I work for. And we are the largest private dispute resolution service provider in the world. And we get involved in every kind of conflict, including those that should never get into litigation. And if you want to learn more about that, it's the JAMS Pathways initiative under jamspathways.com. So there's a lot there.
Well, like you said, hopefully we can head some of that off. I guess in general, do we see more workplace conflict, or does it just feel that way?
Well, a little bit of both. I checked some statistics, and so the Bureau of Labor Management statistics say that conflict is actually, at least violence in the workplace, is sharply down from the mid-90s. But when I talk to our mediators and arbitrators across the country at our 29 offices, they say that in the employment world, there's a lot more incivility and rudeness. So I do think that people are having a more stressful time in the workplace.
What are some of the common, then, ways we see that actually play out in the workplace?
Well, people feel like they're not being treated fairly, and they say things that maybe, aren't so super sensitive. They might, because of, the nature of remote and hybrid work, say something on a Zoom or put something in a chat, and there really isn't a chance to debrief that gracefully over, the coffee pot. And so, relationships deteriorate, and people start to quiet quit, or maybe worse.
We also are at this point in the year where we get the get-togethers, the holiday parties, things like that, maybe the more traditional face-to-face settings. I suppose on the one hand, that could be a good place to work on those relationships, although it also seems possibly to be the very kind of place where things come to a head. What are your thoughts as we head into the Christmas party season?
Well, forced socializing is a lot of pressure for people. And, not everybody is as adept as they'd like to be at mixing business and pleasure. So for some person, they just watched a great Netflix comedy special and they tell a joke, and somebody else finds that dramatically offensive. So I think people need to be on their guard. If you're a leader, you want to keep people busy, you want to minimize alcohol use, or maybe eliminate it if possible, if that's graceful. And I think you want to keep your holiday party relatively short. If people want to socialize separately, they can use that as an opportunity to go to a restaurant or someplace afterwards.
Let's dive a little more deeply into that idea of leadership, because our viewers are the very people who are deciding whether they're ready to jump into the business ownership world, or maybe they're in it right now and they're still growing and learning. Are there strategies to prevent these sorts of things from boiling up in the workplace? Does it start with keeping a keen eye before anything ever starts? Does it ever really stop this task of making sure people get along?
Well, I think that leaders can play a key role in dampening conflict in their office. They're clearly focal and they need to walk their talk. So probably the most important thing I would say to a leader is get trained to manage people. Get some training in difficult conversations, mediation and facilitation skills. Learn about people who maybe deviate from neurotypical. We call that different kinds of minds. It's really not common sense. I've done a lot of work in the academic world, and you talk to leaders in, say, higher ed, and you say, you probably have a PhD, and it's probably not in conflict resolution. I taught for 25 years at a law school, and I can tell you, I still have a huge reading list. So it's not common sense. And if you're a leader, you need to, know what you're talking about in order to lead. So get trained. That's a big one.
That's an important phrase to make sure everybody heard correctly. It's not common sense, so it may be actually requiring some extra training.
And leaders often reach into the wrong bucket. I know a person who's a head of surgery who came out of the military, and when you're operating on somebody and you say, I want the number 2 scalpel, you don't want somebody to question you. And so, it's a very top-down leadership style. But when you're not in the operatory and you're dealing with people, that same kind of leadership style that's worked for you and gotten you to where you want to be may not necessarily work in a different environment. And so people need to know, don't necessarily lean on your only strength. Develop your portfolio a little bit more.
And you even said at the top of this, that the idea is to avoid litigation, but as a boss, I suppose you have to be mindful of the fact that just because 2 people have a conflict, that doesn't leave you out of the equation if it either starts or brews up or ends up spilling over in your workplace. There's a responsibility there.
Absolutely, there is. And so I would say, in addition to getting trained, here are a couple of other tips when conflict is happening right in front of you. One is replace judgment with curiosity. That's a big one. I think that there are 4 magic words that can resolve an awful lot of conflict, and probably as a reporter, these words really well, where somebody says something, say more about that. That's a big one, right? And so instead of reacting, ask another question. Sort of a corollary to that is, when you think somebody's done speaking, count to 10. Take a breath before reacting. People will usually fill that silence in with important information, and you'll notice things. You'll notice changes in their behavior. You'll notice maybe changes in facial expression, and you don't need to worry about forgetting what you're going to say, because if it was important enough, you're going to remember that. Say what feels right after your 10 count, and it may be different than your first initial reaction. And I would say one other important thing for leaders is to remember, not all conflict is bad. There's task conflict where people are arguing, different perspectives on how to get the job done. And then there's relationship conflict, which really doesn't necessarily belong at work. And so it's important for leaders to keep everybody focused on why they're there. If the focus is on the mission, conflict around the mission and how to get it done is good. Conflict that is, feels like relationship conflict, like if I raise an idea and you critique my idea, if we're trying to get the job done, that's great. If I feel like you were personally attacking me in the wrong way, that could be a problem. And so leaders need to, we like to say, separate the people from the problem.
Richard Burke, this has been fascinating. Notes for all to take, whether they're in that leadership position or may soon take one. We really appreciate the expertise today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I hope that you have a wonderful and conflict-free holiday season. And I'll just say one last thing for leaders generally. Know when you're in over your head. I don't do my own taxes. I hire an expert. So once in a while, if conflict gets a little bit too big for you in the office, there are professionals like me all over the country who have dedicated their lives just to helping out people who are suffering from conflict.
Our thanks again to all the contributors who joined us for this episode of the Business Equity and Opportunities podcast. We hope you found it enlightening, useful, and inspiring. You'll find more information about the show on our website, BEOshow.com. You can watch Business Equity and Opportunities Sunday mornings at 10 on Wish TV or live stream it through wishtv.com. Each week we provide 7 full segments with topics ranging from how to get started and how to access capital to the day-to-day running of your business and questions about accounting and bookkeeping. We feature business news and trends and always share a success story from one of our contributors. Join us next time for more insights into the world of small business. Be sure to sign up for our Business Equity and Opportunities newsletter to get even more valuable, up-to-date information. And if you have any questions or you'd like to be part of our show, please email us. The address is beo@wishtv.com. We'd love to hear from you. I'm Scott Sander. Thanks for listening.
Watch the Business Equity and Opportunities show on Wish TV and access all of our content and share it on demand anytime at BEOshow.com. You can find more podcasts from Wish TV on the All Indiana Podcast Network at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.